And then I'm making these part stand up, however direction you think this needs to go. I'm going to have to play with that guy a little bit. But this guy has been about our time, and he's just barely starting to move. And so once he's stand that way, you can move him a little bit if he needs adjusted. If he's where he is, then just leave him. And then go ahead and get the movements in the other ones. Okay, I went ahead and added the 4 leaves on the bottom and then 1 more on the top. And just the thing with these, especially these, you want as much movement as possible. When this one dries a little bit more, I'm going to make sure that he is very movie. I know that's not a word. Has a lot of movement in him. A lot of movement showing. Now this guy, oh, I messed with him too much. But that's a great example. I shouldn't have messed with him when I did. So I am just going to remove the oil and then glue him on with my E6000. And I'm glad that happened. So if you have any that you're messing with them too much near that dry period, you want to mess with this part up here, but not move this part down here. So I'm just going to go ahead and glue that on with my E6000. Or actually what I might do is while I got him off, I might paint him first so he wouldn't be so hard, and then put him back on. So that's another thing. But while these guys are moving, I want to get them out as much. Now this guy's still going to move for a while, and I'm still going to move him a little bit more till he gets drier. If he's where you like him, don't move him. If you think they need a little bit more movement and it keeps moving back down, then let them get a little bit harder, the clay a little bit harder, and then you can move that. Now that guy's nice and dry there, but go ahead and get those done, and then go ahead and paint the leaves exactly the same way as we did the first time around, and then we can finally start on those crazy acorns. I've colored all my leaves all the way around now. I've got them all added. I do have the one that I still have not done, and the one thing that I did add to the leaves is a float, and just pick one side of the leaf here and float the burnt umber down it. So I'm going to pick this side, and I'm just going to float that right down the middle. And you can see where I've done it here and here and here. This one I actually tried both sides, but most of them have just one. If you like that, do that. If you don't worry about it. I'm going to go ahead and show you how I put my glue on. And this is E6000, but I use every bit of it. Sometimes people say it's getting a little bit harder. Just take your toothpick, put it down. Now see, we only want to put the glue where this is going to hit. So we want some here and here. And you can use it until the glue is all gone. So that's kind of a little trick here. I've got my dog moaning in the background. It's a hard life he has. So normally you should set this on here. I gotta figure out where it goes now. And hold it for several minutes. And apply pressure and hold that as tight as you can. And that will put that into place, and then it will not come off. The other thing I do, this isn't going to move around as much, but if you had a bigger piece, take your painter's tape and just tape it into place. And it's not going to move around on you. So if you had an area where it could slide, you don't want it to slide. So now we're going to talk about our acorns. And our acorns, we have all of our little guys done. Now, I'm going to tell you why I do it the way I have done it. I have never had any of my acorns or leaves fall off of my gourds. And I put them on before I paint them. they're still wet and they stick to that gourd. So that's the reason I do it. I know it would be easier to leave them off and then actually put them on after you've painted them, but then they have a little bit more chance of falling off. So that's why I do it the way I do it. So we're going to teach you how to make the acorns now. And this is something you can do while you're waiting for other parts of it to dry. And I'm just going to do little tiny pieces. Little tiny pieces here. And just for your information, I have a lot of leaves on this one. I have done it very thick, but I'm starting my third thing of QuikWood. So depending on how many leaves you want to put on it is how many QuikWoods. So really think about that when you're starting to work with it here. And we have QuikWood at miriamjoy.com if you need it. So what we're going to do, this is probably enough for a couple here, we'll see. So we're going to take this and we're going to roll it into a ball, and we're going to make our cap on our little acorn, and I'm going to use either my number 2 tool or my number 3 tool here, depending on how big we want these. But what I start to do is I press this in here and I start rubbing it bigger and bigger and bigger. And I can do it with the number 2 tool, but I think the number 3 would be better. So I've got my number 3 tool. We'll try him too. And what you do, and you can do it with your 2 if you just have the 2, is you press that along the sides and kind of roll it. And what you want to do is get it big enough for whichever one of these that you are using. And you're going to kind of set it on. And I'm just going to lightly kind of push this along the side. And we're also going to just bring it up to a little point here. If you don't want the point, you don't have to do the point. Now we don't want it sharp enough that's going to break off, so fragile it breaks off. We don't want our fingerprints on there too much. So the next thing I'm going to do, there's a couple of ways we can do this. You can take your card and you can just do it singly. Then that's how I've done most of mine, or you can actually do it with a crosshatch. And I like the crosshatch. I think that's just a little bit nicer, just a little bit more country or whatever. But we are going to have to paint in those a little bit. But I think it's just as easy to paint as a sideways line as a straight up and down line. So I am not going to worry about it. You could just do one first and then do the other. So they're really not hard at all. They really just don't make them hard. This whole thing with the leaves is really not hard. Just don't make it that way. So I've done my little X's, and we have our little acorn here. And then you're going to decide where you want them to go on, and you're simply going to push them on in all the different areas. And you want to push them pretty good, but we'll push them using our finger on the hard part and just settle that right down into our gourd. So I'm going to have at least 2 on this part. I kind of want to show you all the different. I have 3 here. In smaller areas I have 1 or 2, but bigger areas I have 3. And I'm going to have more up on my front right here to kind of fill that area into. So go ahead and get those done. We're going to push them into certain areas. And I put little veins on these, and I just took my clay and just rolled it out into a thin thing and just laid it down. The only thing I will tell you, they are very hard to paint. So I'm not going to do that. You could even do that maybe with some, maybe we'll try that, maybe with some embossing powder. Maybe we'll put a couple of those with a gold embossing powder. That might be a cool idea as well. So go ahead and try get all your acorns on, and then we'll take a look at that. The one thing I wanted to say is when you're putting on your acorns, make sure that you have enough room for that hole for your stone. And if that's something you want to put in earlier, you can. You can do it with a drill bit, or I'm going to use an awl. That's up to you totally. But I've got my acorns all the way around. And I did more instead of less. You may like less. That's just a personal opinion. That's totally up to you. But while these guys are drying, before we start painting them, we talked about doing those swirls. So I'm going to do that. And this is just, can be leftover QuikWood. It doesn't have to be anything fancy, just your leftovers. If you have a spot, and you could even be doing this while you're working. If you have some of the acorn and you know where you want it to go, and kind of think about that. You may kind of even want to take your pencil and figure out where you want to go. I know I want one there, and I want one here, and I want one probably here. I'm not sure about this area yet. And let's see where we would want some on the bottom. I would like one there. And it's kind of end up being where I'm at the top, so I'm not sure. I'm going to try and offset them a bit. You don't need too many, just a few. So maybe like 3 or 4 on the top and 3 or 4 on the bottom. I still may end up putting one in here. And that's just a guideline for me. That's not how I'm going to do them necessarily. So we'll get our little QuikWood mixed up here. And I ended up having one acorn that I didn't use. You don't have to use them all up. Don't feel bad if you don't. I actually ended up making a couple more from what I had originally had, and then I didn't end up using one. So that's pretty good. So what we're going to do with these is we're going to take just a small section. Spray my hands a little bit more here. You don't want so much oil that you get it so oily that you can't stick it. That's kind of important too. And we're just going to roll it in a ball and then roll it out. Make it real thin and wispy, and this may even still be too much. Try and get it as much as you can to about all the same consistency, the same size. So think about that, and don't be afraid to cut it. I'm going to start on one of these back here where it's a little bit easier to get up into. So I'm going to have it coming down from the little parts right there, and I want it to just kind of wisp. And sometimes letting it just go where it wants to go is nice too. So when you get it where you want it, don't flatten it too much, just enough to kind of have it all the same. And then we're going to use our I always call these embossing powders, and they're not embossing powders. They are pigment powders. They are fine. That is a big difference. And I have a bad habit of that. So I'm going to use a mop brush or an old brush, and you're going to dip it into your gold and then into the lid and knock most of that off. Otherwise, you're going to end up with it everywhere. And then while your QuikWood is wet, we're just going to bring our brush along and just paint it. Don't push your brush too hard because you don't want the to change the way the QuikWood is moving or anything like that. Now you see the QuikWood around it a little bit. Now make sure you get the sides Isn't that really pretty? That just adds a different element to it. But what you can do is once it starts to dry is just take another brush and just get this off as much as possible. Brush that off there. Or you may like that look, and I kind of do a lot of times just leave that look. It just kind of looks powdered to me. So go ahead and do that, and then we'll start to paint our acorns. I did add wispies. I did the first 2, but then I decided I needed 3. You always want to, when you look at the focal point. And I did it all the way around. Just remember, if it's not real pliable, you need to throw it away and start with a new one. Otherwise, it's not going to end up sticking in the long run, especially with the little wispies. Another thing is you want to make sure they come out from somewhere. Don't just have them coming from nothing and just kind of not attached to anything. You want to make sure that they're tucked in and attached really well. So we're going to take our alcohol and we're going to clean up all of our acorns now really well so that we can go ahead and paint those. So once those are all dry, we're going to come in and paint these the best that we can. And the base part of these, we're going to use a golden brown, or no, excuse me, this is medium brown, or I have nutmeg brown. So just a medium type brown, because we also want to do some shading on here too for our lines and everything. So the nice thing about these guys, they're backed up to each other, so we can do them next to each other. But with your flat, sometimes you can get really down in there. Sometimes you may need a little bit of a liner brush or a smaller brush. So we're going to go ahead and get all of our bases coated. If you think it needs 2 coats, then go ahead and do 2 coats on that. I went and did the acorns, and you can see these edges right here are messy, and that's because this next color will cover over it. So I'm not going to worry about that, trying to get that smooth. We're just going to fix right over that. Now, just make sure you're looking at all angles. I see one right here that I missed, and getting those in there, that color down in some of those cracks. You don't want any of that bare wood, that stark color to show up. And I did 2 coats. You can see it's still not solid color, but acorns aren't, so I'm going to leave it like that. That's something I always try to remember. What is nature? It's got the different tones in it, so don't stress over that too much. And I just put that second layer where you could really see it. If it didn't show up, I didn't do it. Okay, we're going to go back to our shading color we've been using, burnt umber. And we're going to water it down again, and just enough that it kind of makes a ink consistency again, just like we did last time with our fine liner brush. And then we're going to come in and we're going to try to hit these crisscrosses and just do the best you can. And we're just going to, and some of them where they're out of sight and you can't get to them, then don't worry about them. But we're just going to hit all of the crisscrosses and get them to show up really well. And if that was one of the reasons, I don't think there's much difference in doing a crisscross than doing, I don't think they're that much easier to paint than the other way. And don't worry about getting it again up there on that one part. So I am just going to go back and hit all of those. That's why I haven't painted the inside yet. So if I knock it, I'm not worried about it. Okay, we've got these all done, and see how they're really starting to take shape. So I'm going to do my inside colors, either golden brown or raw sienna, whichever one you have. I think the golden brown covers a little bit better. If you don't, then go ahead and do the raw sienna, but we want a rich kind of golden brown color, and I'm probably going to use a flat or a little bit of an angle, because on the angles you can get into the corners real well. The really nice thing about this is we've already got this, so you're just going to bump up next to that, and that should be really simple. Do it all the way around. 2 coats on these minimum, but just bump up the next to that first little part of the acorn, and you should be very easy to base coat all of those with 2 layers. Once your center color has dried, we're going to float some color on the inside of that. And you can use a smaller brush if you want to. Just don't take your paint more than 1/2 to 3/4 of the way full. And we're just going to float our darkest color up against the acorns, and don't be afraid to do it a couple times. Like, let that dry and then we'll hit it from the other side, because it's hard to walk it all the way around. So I kind of do one side, do it in 2 to 3 sections. And if you also need to hit that color again one more time, you can. That's up to you. So we're gonna get those all the way around here. And it's a little bit of color. It's not supposed to be too much. We're using a smaller shader than the ones we've used before. I got that guy a little bit wet. So now my first one should be dry enough I can walk it around the other direction. And don't be afraid to fake it. Even on the liner work on a lot of these, if I thought it needed a line, I added a line. Just because it's not there doesn't mean it can't be there. Just do it the way you feel best. And I think I need to do this guy again. And then I'm going to do him from the back to the front. And then look to see if I need to do him one more time. So get that all done. We've got a little bit of liner work left to do and a highlight, and then we'll be done with those acorns. It's a lot of detail, but if you've ever noticed that pieces that you like, it's the attention to the details that are really important. So don't be afraid to really put those details in there. Once you have all of those in, we're going to use our burnt umber and we're going to water it down again, eat consistency with our little liner. And what we're going to do this time is we're going to just outline right around the edge of the inside of that acorn, just to make that nice and clean. So we're going to do it all the way around, and a real thin line, doesn't need to be thick at all, and that's just going to clean that up. So we're going to do each and every one of those. It's also going to set the acorn into the lid as well as have it show up, so that you can see that center part. So go ahead and finish all of those. We'll add our highlight. The last thing we're going to do is put our highlight on our acorns. And I'm going to be using ivory. I'm not going to use white. It's a little bit stark. You could use any yellow white that you wanted to. And whatever size brush you feel comfortable with, we're going to float the color. Now, because this is a white or a lighter color, this would be called a highlight and not a shade, but it's still floating. And what we're going to do is simply, with the color towards the outside, we're just going to kind of come in here and make these kind of wispy little highlights here. And the color is going to fade in a little bit more. I've got it not quite as blended as I would like it, so I'm going to blend it just a little bit more. But you're just coming in and just kind of giving it almost a C little shape here, just to set those little highlights off. And just to give that reflective light on each one of our acorns. If you wanted to give it that woodsy feel, you also could come in with your liner brush and just set that again to do the pedmuckles on those. That's up to you. But we've got that all done. That's going to be drying up nice and neat here. The other thing that I had done with these with wax, and I probably would do it if I hadn't done the kind of squiggly squirrel things, is the 3 dots of paint. And you could use those, and all you would have to do is take the wax design tool and dip into a fresh pot of paint and go dip, dip, dip. And, excuse me, dip, let's just show you here. Load it up and go dot, dot, dot. And each one is going to get smaller as you go. And you could use any of the colors that we used on the leaves. So that is strictly up to you. So at this point in time, I am all done with everything. I am going to make sure I have nothing that I need to clean off before I take it out and varnish it, because of the alcohol inks and because of so much detail. I am going to spray varnish it. I'm going to use satin or matte. You want to be careful when you're working with those, especially on a wet humid day, that it can turn white, so you want to make sure that you have more of a dry day. That's real important. But that is our basics. That was a fun class. I know there was a lot of detail, but I hope you learned a lot. After you varnish it, we're going to put our stone in, and we're going to do it really simple. Like I said, you could use a drill bit, or I am just going to use a bead reamer. You can use an awl, and I am just going to push it till it goes through. And the hole, it depends on the size of cording you want to use. Just be really careful. You do not want to get this close enough to the edge that you bust through. And if you're worried about applying the pressure, then use your drill bit, because we just want to work this all the way through with a big enough hole that we can get our whatever you want to hang it with. These are some other stones that we had. Isn't that beautiful? But depending on what your stone is kind of what color you'd want to highlight here. And boy, I don't know. I like the purple, but I sure like some of these as well. I also just want to show you how to do a hook, because I think this will hang better. And I am just taking my bottlenose tweezers here, and I'm going to make a hook that goes through the back, and then however far you want this one to hang in the front, you may have to play with it. Just bring that up as well and cut it off. So like I said, a simple S hook is what that basically is, and just using your jewelry wire or wire like that. And depending on how this goes in here, whether I'll make that hook go up in the back or what I decide on it. Now see, it's kind of hanging backwards, so I want that to hang more forward, and I need to sand that off a little bit so it doesn't scratch anybody. You also can twist around it a little bit if you want it as well, but just simply set your stone in there and see how that just holds that shape so much nicer than it falling towards the back. With the hook like this, you can make your stones interchangeable too. You could change them with all kinds of fun things if you wanted to, or somebody likes something, and then if you wanted to keep it secure, you're not going to move it much, just use a pair of pliers and tweeze these together real tight, and then you'll have it. So you have a bunch of different options. You also can take your tea light behind it and put a nice one in there to light up your stone. I don't have a real bright one here, but it will light up your stone, especially like on our purple one as well. So just think outside the box and see all the fun things you'd like to add it. And let me know if you have any question, or if there's any way we can help you with anything we've done. Thank you so much for joining me today. As always, if you ever have a question, please email me at art@miriamjoy.com. You also can purchase QuikWood and any of the other items that we may have mentioned that are products of Miriam Joy at miriamjoy.com. Thank you so much for joining me. God bless.